A judge's memories. I have seen many things in my life. As a judge, I have made difficult decisions. Some cases were simple, but others were not. Some people were innocent, and some were guilty. I always followed the law. I always tried to be fair. But one case changed everything for me. It was the most dangerous case of my career. I knew that my decision could change lives. I also knew that my own life was at risk. It was a cold winter morning. I arrived at the courthouse early. The city was quiet and the streets were empty. A soft wind blew through the trees, making the branches shake. I walked into my office and sat at my desk. My hands felt cold as I picked up the case files. There were many papers to read, but I already knew the details. A powerful man was accused of a serious crime. People were watching. The media was waiting. Some people wanted justice. Others wanted the case to disappear. The courtroom was full. People whispered to each other. Some looked worried. Some looked angry. The accused man sat in his chair. He wore a dark suit and a serious expression. He looked calm, but I knew he was nervous. His lawyer spoke first. He stood up and walked to the center of the room. His voice was strong. He said his client was innocent. He said there was no real proof. He asked the jury to think carefully. Then the prosecutor stood up. He held some papers in his hand. His eyes were sharp. He called witnesses. He showed evidence. He spoke with confidence. The case was strong. The accused man did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the table in front of him. I could feel the tension in the room. As I listened, I felt the weight of my job. I had to be fair. I had to follow the law. But I also knew that some people did not want justice. Some wanted power. Some wanted control. I could feel eyes watching me. The air in the room felt heavy. I knew that if I made the wrong decision, I could be in danger. I took a deep breath. I looked at the accused man. I looked at the evidence. The room was silent. Everyone was waiting for my decision. My heart was beating fast, but I did not show I had to stay strong. I had to do what was right. I closed my eyes for a moment. I needed to think. The evidence was clear, but I also knew the power of the man on trial. He had money. He had influence. He had connections. Many people feared him. I had heard rumors. Some said that judges who ruled against him had faced trouble. Some had lost their jobs. Some had left the city. Some had even disappeared. I opened my eyes and looked at the courtroom. The jury sat quietly, waiting for my words. The audience was watching. Some people had worried faces. Others looked curious. The accused man sat still, his hands folded in front of him. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. The prosecutor looked at me, waiting. The tension in the room grew stronger. I picked up the case file again. I read the statements. The witnesses had given clear testimonies. The evidence was strong. The prosecutor had done his job well. Everything pointed to the accused man being guilty. But I also knew that justice was not always simple. Sometimes truth was not enough. Sometimes power changed everything. I thought about my family. I thought about my wife and my 2 children. I had always believed in the law. I had always believed in doing the right thing. But now, I wondered if the right thing would put my family in danger. I felt sweat on my forehead, even though the room was cold. I took another deep breath. The courtroom remained silent. The accused man finally looked at me. His eyes were dark and serious. It was not a look of fear. It was a look of warning. It was a look that said he was prepared for anything. I had seen that look before. I knew what it meant. He was powerful, and he wanted me to know it. I looked away. I could not let fear control me. I had taken an oath to serve justice. I had promised to follow the law. I had to make a decision based on the truth, not on fear. But at that moment, fear was real. The danger was real. I could feel it in my bones. I turned to the jury. I saw their faces. Some were confused. Some looked afraid. They knew the power of the accused man, too. They knew what my decision could mean. I had never felt so much pressure in my life. I had to speak. I had to decide. I took a deep breath and sat up straight. My hands rested on the wooden desk in front of me. The room was silent, but I could feel the weight of 100 eyes on me. The jury was waiting. The lawyers were waiting. The accused man was waiting. But most of all, I knew that the world outside this courtroom was waiting, too. I looked at the prosecutor. He had done his job well. He had presented strong evidence. He had brought reliable witnesses. He had built a solid case. His face was calm, but I could see the hope in his eyes. He believed in justice. He believed that the guilty should pay for their crimes. I had once believed the same thing without fear, but now fear was creeping in. Then I turned to the defense lawyer. He was confident, even though the evidence was against him. He stood next to his client with his hands behind his back. He had argued that the case was weak. He had tried to create doubt, but deep inside, he knew the truth. He knew his client was guilty. Still, his job was to defend him, and he had done it well. The accused man leaned forward slightly. His eyes stayed on me. He was not afraid. He was not worried. He had power, and he knew it. He believed that no one could touch him. He believed that no matter what I said, he would walk free. And maybe he was right. I looked at the jury again. They seemed unsure. They had listened to both sides. They had heard the evidence, but they also knew the risk. If they found him guilty, what would happen? Would they be safe? Would their families be safe? These were the questions in their minds, and I understood them. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting. The city was watching. The people wanted justice, but they also feared the consequences. This was not just another case. This was more than guilt or innocence. This was about power. This was about control. And I was in the middle of it. I cleared my throat and looked around the room one last time. My decision would change everything. I had spent years studying the law. I had spent years believing in fairness. But now I had to ask myself, was justice really possible when fear was stronger than truth? I sat still, my fingers pressing lightly against the desk. The silence in the courtroom felt heavier with each passing second. The weight of my decision was almost unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest, but my face remained calm. A judge must never show fear. A judge must never show doubt. But inside, I felt both. I thought about the law books I had studied for years. They had taught me about justice, about fairness, about truth. They had taught me that the law was strong, that it protected the innocent and punished the guilty. But sitting in that courtroom, facing a man who held more power than the law itself, I wondered if those lessons still mattered. The accused man leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in his lap. His expression had not changed. He was not worried. He was not nervous. He was waiting, but not like the others. He was waiting because he was sure of the outcome. He was sure that fear would win. He was sure that I would not dare to speak against him. The jury shifted in their seats. Some of them looked down. Some of them glanced at each other. I could see the conflict in their eyes. They wanted to do the right thing, but they were afraid of what would happen next. I could not blame them. I felt the same way. I thought about my family again. I thought about my wife, my children. They trusted me to do my job, to make the right decision. But was the right decision worth the risk? Would I be putting them in danger by speaking the truth? The thought sent a cold chill down my spine. I picked up my gavel and gripped it tightly. My decision was final. There was no turning back. The city was watching. The world was watching. But more than anything, I knew that my conscience was watching. I could not let fear decide for me. I had to make the choice myself. I took a deep breath. The room remained silent. My heart pounded harder. My voice had to be strong. My words had to be clear. It was time. I raised my gavel, ready to speak. I held the gavel in my hand, feeling its weight. The courtroom was silent, but the air was thick with tension. Every person in the room was watching me, waiting for my words. My decision would not just end this trial, it would decide my future, my family's safety, and perhaps even the city's fate. The thought was overwhelming, but I forced myself to stay calm. A judge must always appear strong. I turned my gaze to the accused man. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held a quiet confidence. He was sure that I would not have the courage to stand against him. He believed that fear would keep me silent. He believed that power was stronger than justice. But was he right? I had dedicated my life to the law. I had believed in justice, in truth, in fairness. But what was the law worth if it could be broken by fear? The prosecutor sat still, his hands folded tightly on the table. His expression was tense but hopeful. He had fought hard in this case. He had presented every piece of evidence, every witness, every argument. He had done everything he could to prove the truth. But in the end, the decision was mine, and he knew that my decision was not just about facts. It was about courage. I glanced at the jury. Some of them avoided my eyes, while others watched me with silent expectation. They had done their duty. They had examined the case carefully. But now they were afraid. They knew what this verdict could mean for them, for their families, for their lives. They had seen what happened to those who spoke against powerful men. They were not sure if justice was worth the risk. Outside the courthouse, The city waited. Reporters stood with their cameras ready to spread my words to the world. The people wanted justice. They wanted fairness. But they also wanted safety. I knew that my decision would bring consequences, no matter what I chose. There was no easy path. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I could not let fear win. I had spent years believing in the power of the law, and I could not betray that belief now. Justice had to mean something. Truth had to matter. I had to be stronger than my fear. I raised the gavel higher, preparing to speak. The courtroom remained silent. Every heartbeat, every breath felt louder than ever before. It was time. My words would change everything. But was I ready to face the consequences? I gripped the gavel, my fingers pressing against the wood. The weight of my decision felt heavier than ever. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, steady but loud. The entire courtroom waited, frozen in silence. The accused man did not move. His expression remained calm, as if he already knew what I would say. But he did not know. Not yet. I took a slow breath. The law had guided me for years. It had shaped my thoughts, my actions, my entire life. But today, the law was not just words on paper. Today, the law was me. My voice, my decision, my courage, it all mattered now. I could not let fear take control. I looked at the jury one last time. Some of them met my eyes, others looked away. They were afraid, just as I was. They knew what this decision could mean. They knew the risks. But justice was not about fear. Justice was about truth, and truth had to stand, no matter the cost. Outside, the world was waiting. The city, the reporters, the people, they all wanted to know what I would say. Would I choose the safe path? Would I bow to pressure? Or would I stand firm, even if it meant stepping into danger? The answer had to come now. I lifted the gavel, my grip steady. My voice was strong when I spoke. The words left my mouth, final and clear. The silence in the courtroom broke. Gasps, whispers, movement. The accused man's face finally changed. For the first time, I saw surprise, maybe even fear. The trial was over. My decision was made. And now, I had to live with it. Whatever came next, I was ready.